Let's turn our attention now to what's happening over at Disney and the company announcing that it would delay the opening of Disneyland out in California. Of course, the NBA is about to descend on Disney World down in Orlando. Both locations are seeing case counts rise quite quickly. And Dan Roberts, when Disney announced these, kind of where it thought its parks business was headed maybe a couple months ago, I think we would sit here and say, that's reasonable. Maybe things will be okay. But now the situation has really deteriorated quite quickly for them, partly because of those locations, but partly just because of what has happened beyond their control.
Yeah, that's exactly right. It's those locations, but also other states. And now, obviously, nationally, the optics just don't look very good. Let's make sure that we clarify here the delay on Disneyland, which was going to reopen, I should say, July 17. The delay is not because the state of California kind of overtly said, hey, you can't do that after all. What had happened was when Disney announced this is our plan for the reopen date, it did say dependent on state approval and state guidelines. And Disney was waiting on California issuing its official reopening guidelines for theme parks. Now, California came out and said, we're not going to be issuing that official guidance until after July 4. And obviously, if Disneyland is to reopen on July 17, you've got to bring employees, many thousands of them, back many days before July 17. So if the guidance isn't going to come until after July 4, it makes sense they had to push the date. But the other thing that happened was that the local coalition of resort unions, resort employee labor resort unions, came out and said, we're going to protest if Disneyland does not change its mind about reopening because of the spike in cases. Now, you mentioned Disney World. Disney World over in Florida is set to reopen on July 11. I don't see how that's possible. And Disney hasn't come out and delayed that yet, but that's almost guaranteed that that is going to be pushed as well. And you mentioned the sports leagues. It's interesting what's happening with the sports leagues. It's a similar thing. Because of the new spike in cases, I think the leagues like Disney, which were very optimistic 3 weeks ago, and 3 weeks ago, things looked a lot better, had very optimistic plans that now suddenly don't look very plausible. Now, the NBA and Major League Soccer are headed to Disney World. Those plans still might work out. Those make some sense. They're going to be in bubbles. It looks pretty safe. But the sports that are trying to come back and not have all the players in a bubble, Major League Baseball, NHL is going to be in 2 hub cities, college football, and then the NFL, those start to look very much in doubt. Not to kind of transition from Disney to sports, but it's all the same thing, right? It's the same story. It's organizations that had a very optimistic plan that now, because of these new spikes, don't look very plausible.
Well, and, again, as you mentioned, not to go right into the sports world, but that's the first area we've seen groups try to congregate again. And guess what? In this environment, people get sick, and then you have positive cases. And I think it's a lot different when you've told families they can come back to Disney World and, now you have half the staff is sick and the park is closed. And I think that's a big problem that they know they can't avoid at this point. So that's why they're pushing out.
Yeah, and one more thing I'd note that might surprise a lot of people. At Disneyland, they're still planning to open the part of the complex that has some dining for outdoor dining and shops, gift shops and things, that is separate from the theme park. And that's exactly what happened with Disneyland Shanghai, that before that park reopened, they reopened a complex with distancing rules in place and with 30% capacity that was separate from the park, but is part of the same property. So many people probably looking on surprised that any part would reopen, but it's worth noting that. And I also think that some people feel that, look, if I wear a mask, I'm willing to go to Disney right now. I'm willing to go to a movie theater. And another Disney story today, Disney likely going to push the release of Mulan again, and that makes sense as well. But despite those rising cases, there are certainly a lot of people out there in the country right now who say, well, if you're concerned, you stay home, but I'm willing to go out and wear a mask and do activities. So every business and every organization now has to decide for itself.
Hey investors, Zach Guzman here. Are you interested in learning more about the markets and getting the latest financial news? Well, then click right here to subscribe to our Yahoo Finance YouTube channel. Get the latest up-to-the-minute market analysis, big interviews in the world of finance, and information on how to manage your money every day wherever you are.